Let me start this in a very simple way. Because if this doesn't land, nothing else in this video will. If you are watching this, there's a decent chance that your life isn't falling apart. But it also doesn't feel like it's really moving in the direction you imagined it would be by now. And that in between state is often harder to deal with than actual failure itself. Because there's nothing dramatic enough to fix and nothing broken enough to walk away from. You're still functioning, still showing up, still doing what you're supposed to do. But somewhere in the background, there's this quiet feeling that time is passing and you're not entirely sure what it's passing towards. And that's usually the moment when people start waiting without realizing that they have entered a waiting phase. Not waiting in an obvious way, but waiting for clarity, waiting for confidence, waiting for a signal that says, now you can move without risking everything. And most people don't question this because waiting like this feels responsible, it feels thoughtful, and it feels safer than acting on half certainty. So it slowly becomes a default state rather than a conscious choice. However, what people do not realize is that this is usually the point where they're expecting life to do something on their behalf. Not dramatically or magically, but just enough to nudge things into place so they don't have to be the one to make an uncomfortable move. This is where the idea of this video comes in, that nobody is coming to save you. And I don't mean that in an aggressive or dismissive way, but in a very practical sense. Because life doesn't reorganize itself around potential effort or patience. It responds to movement. And if nothing moves, nothing changes. Most frustration in adult life comes from unspoken expectations. Expectations that effort should eventually turn into progress. That being patient should be rewarded. Or someone will notice how hard you are trying and step in at right moment. And when that doesn't happen, it starts to feel personal, even though most of the time it isn't. The truth is that everybody around you is busy managing their own uncertainty, their own compromises, and their own unfinished plans, which means even people who genuinely care about you can only support you emotionally, not directionally, because no one else can take responsibility for where your life goes. Waiting feels safe because it delays the responsibility. And as long as you're waiting, you don't have to face the possibility that your decisions might not work out the way you hoped. Because once you act, your ideas stop being theoretical and start interacting with reality, which is uncomfortable in a way that planning never is. This is why people often confuse thinking with progress, because thinking gives the illusion of movement without the risk of consequence. While on the other hand, action forces feedback, and feedback is that most people are actually afraid of. Once you genuinely accept that nobody is coming to save you, something subtle but important shifts. Because you stop treating inaction as a neutral state and start seeing it as a decision that also has consequences, even if they arrive slowly and quietly. Now, this doesn't suddenly make you confident or fearless, but it does changes how you relate to uncertainty. Because instead of seeing uncertainty as a sign that you should stop, you start seeing it as the default condition under which most meaningful decisions are made. You also stop waiting for permission to choose a direction without full information, permission to disappoint people who had expectations of you, and permission to start before you feel ready. Because you realize that no one ever hands out that permission explicitly. Now, what replaces waiting is not boldness, but ownership. And ownership is heavy at first because it removes excuses, but it is also grounding. Because it narrows your focus to that one thing that you can actually influence, which is your next move. Not the perfect move, not even the impressive one, but that honest one that breaks the standstill. Because life responds to movement and not intention. And if you're listening to this and start feeling slightly uncomfortable, that's usually a sign that this idea is landing where it needs to. Because discomfort is often the moment where responsibility shifts from hope to action. If this way of thinking resonates with you, there are other conversations on this channel that explore different parts of same problem, like why people feel constantly behind even when they are doing fine. Why confidence is often misunderstood as loudness rather than clarity, and why overthinking feels productive while quietly keeping you stuck. You don't need to watch them immediately, but when you are ready, they're there. Because none of these ideas exist in isolation, and they tend to make more sense when you sit with them slowly rather than trying to fix everything at once. That's all for now. I hope you like it, and I'll meet you in the next one.